Three readings from A Tale of Two Cities. The first reading is entitled The Bastille Prisoner. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief, it was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light, it was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope, it was the winter of despair. We had everything before us, we had nothing before us. We were all going direct to heaven, we were all going direct the other way. In short, the period was so far like the present period that some of its loudest authorities insisted on its being received, for good or for evil, in the superlative degree of comparison only. It was the year of our Lord 1775. Upon a certain November day in that year, the London mail got to Dover in the course of the forenoon, and the head drawer at the Royal George Hotel opened the coach door as his custom was. The inside of the coach, with its damp and dirty straw, its disagreeable smell, and its obscurity, was rather like a larger sort of dog kennel. The only passenger, shaking himself out of it, a tangle of wrapper and straw, was rather like a larger sort of dog. Will there be a packet to Calais tomorrow, drawer? Yes, sir, if the weather holds and the wind sets tolerably fair. The tide will serve pretty nicely at about 2 in the afternoon, sir. Bed, sir? I shall not go to bed till night, but I want a bedroom and a barber. And then breakfast, sir? Yes, sir. That way, sir, if you please. Show Concord. Gentleman's valise and hot water to Concord. Pull off gentleman's boots in Concord. You will find a fine sea coal fire there, sir. Fetch barber to Concord. Stir about there now for Concord. The Concord bedchamber, being always assigned to a passenger by the mail, and passengers by the mail always wrapped up from head to foot, the room had the odd interest for the establishment of the Royal George, that although but one kind of man was seen to go into it, all kinds and varieties of men came out of it. The gentleman who came out of it next morning was a gentleman of 60, formally dressed in a brown suit of clothes, pretty well worn but very well kept, with large square cuffs and large flaps to the pockets. I wish accommodation prepared for a young lady who may come here at any time today. She may ask for me, Mr. Jarvis Lorry, or she may only ask for a gentleman from Tellson's Bank. Please to let me know. Yes, sir. Tellson's Bank in London, sir? Well, yes. Yes, sir. We have oft times the honour to entertain your gentlemen in their travelling backwards and forwards betwixt London and Paris, but not much in the habit of such travelling yourself, I think, sir. Well, not of late years. It's 15 years since I came last from France. Indeed, sir. Rounding his mouth and both his eyes, as he stepped back from the table, the waiter shifted his napkin from his right arm to his left, dropped into a comfortable attitude, and stood surveying the guest while he ate and drank, as from an observatory or watchtower, according to the immemorial usage of waiters in all ages. Mr. Lorry got through the day, had had his dinner, and had poured out his last glass of good claret, with as complete an appearance of satisfaction as is ever to be found in an elderly gentleman of a fresh complexion who has got to the end of a bottle, when a rattling of wheels came up the narrow street and rumbled into the inn-yard. "This is Mamselle," said he. In a very few minutes the waiter came in to announce that Miss Manette had arrived from London and would be happy to see the gentleman from Tellson's. So the gentleman from Tellson's followed the waiter to Miss Manette's apartment. a large dark room, furnished in a funereal manner with black horsehair and lighted by 2 tall candles. He saw standing to receive him a young lady of not more than 17, in a riding cloak and still holding her straw travelling hat by its ribbon in her hand. His eyes rested on a short, slight, pretty figure, a quantity of golden hair, a pair of blue eyes that met his own with an inquiring look, and a forehead with a singular capacity, remembering how young and smooth it was, of lifting itself into an expression that was not quite one of perplexity, or wonder, or alarm, or merely of a bright fixed attention, though it included all the 4 expressions. "Pray take a seat, sir," in a very clear and pleasant young voice, a little foreign in its accent, but a very little indeed. "I kiss your hand, miss." "I received a letter from the bank, sir, yesterday in London, informing me that some new intelligence or discovery—" "The word is not material, miss. Either word will do." "Respecting the small property of my poor father, who I never saw, so long dead, rendered it necessary that I should go to Paris with a gentleman of the bank, so good as to be dispatched to Paris for the purpose." "I was happy, miss, to be entrusted with the charge." "Sir, I thank you gratefully. I was told by the bank that the gentleman would explain to me the details of the business, and that I must prepare myself to find them of a surprising nature. I have done my best to prepare myself, and I naturally have a strong and eager interest to know what they are." "Naturally, yes. It is very difficult to begin." He did not begin, but met her glance. The young forehead lifted itself into that singular expression, but it was pretty and characteristic, besides being singular, and she raised her hand. "Are you quite a stranger to me, sir?" "Am I not?" He watched her as she mused, and the moment she raised her eyes again, went on. "Miss Manette, I am a man of business. I have a business charge to acquit myself of. In your reception of it, don't heed me any more than if I was a speaking machine. Truly, I am not much else. I will, with your leave, relate to you, miss, the story of one of our customers. He was a French gentleman, a scientific gentleman, a man of great achievements, a doctor." "Not of Beauvais?" "Why, yes, of Beauvais. The gentleman was of repute in Paris. I had the honour of knowing him there. Our relations were business relations, but confidential." "May I ask at what time, sir?" "I speak, miss, of 20 years ago. He married an English lady, and I was one of the trustees." "But this is my father's story, sir, and I begin to think that when I was left an orphan, through my mother's surviving my father only 2 years, it was you who brought me to England. I'm almost sure it was you." Mr. Lorry took the little hand that confidingly advanced to take his, and put it with some ceremony to his lips. "Miss Manette, it was I, and you will see how truly I spoke of myself just now in saying I had no feelings, when you reflect that I have never seen you since. No, you have been a ward of Tellson's house since, and I have been busy with the other business of Tellson's house since. So far, miss, as you have remarked, this is the story of your regretted father. Now comes the difference. If your father had not died when he did—" "Oh, don't be frightened. How you start!" She did indeed start. "As I was saying, if Monsieur Manette had not died, if he had suddenly and silently disappeared, if he had been spirited away, if it had not been difficult to guess to what dreadful place, though no art could trace him, if he had had an enemy in some compatriot who could exercise a privilege that I, in my own time, have known the boldest people afraid to speak of in a whisper across the water. For instance, the privilege of filling up blank forms for the consignment of anyone to the oblivion of a prison for any length of time. If his wife had implored the king, the queen, the court, the clergy for any tidings of him, and all quite in vain, then the history of your father would have been the history of this unfortunate gentleman, the Doctor of Beauvais. I entreat you to tell me more, sir. I will. I am going to. You can bear it? I can bear anything but the uncertainty you leave me in at this moment. You speak collectedly, and you are collected. That's good. A matter of business. Regard it as a matter of business. Business that must be done. Now, if this doctor's wife, though a lady of great courage and spirit, had suffered so intensely from this cause before her little child was born, the little child was a daughter, sir? A daughter. A matter of business. Don't be distressed, miss. If the poor lady had suffered so intensely before her little child was born that she came to the determination of sparing the poor child the inheritance of any part of the agony she had known the pains of, by rearing her in the belief that her father was dead. No, don't kneel. In heaven's name, why should you kneel to me? For the truth, oh dear, good, compassionate sir, for the truth, a matter of business. You confuse me, and how can I transact business if I am confused? Let us be clear-headed. If you could kindly mention now, for instance, what 9 times 9 pence are, or how many shillings in 20 guineas, it would be so encouraging. I should be so much more at my ease about your state of mind. Without directly answering to this appeal, she sat so still when he had very gently raised her, and the hands that clasped his wrists were so much more steady than they had been, that she communicated some reassurance to Mr. Jarvis Lorry. That's right. That's right. Courage. Business. You have business before you, useful business. Miss Manette, your mother took this course with you, and when she died, I believe broken-hearted, having never slackened her unavailing search for your father, she left you at 2 years old to grow to be blooming, beautiful, and happy, without the dark cloud upon you of living in uncertainty, whether your father soon wore his heart out in prison or wasted away there through many lingering years. As he said the words, he looked down with admiring pity on the flowing golden hair, as if he pictured to himself that it might have been already tinged with grey. You know that your parents had no great possessions, and that what they had was secured to your mother and to you. There has been no new discovery of money or of any other property, but he felt his wrist held closer, and he stopped. The expression in the forehead had deepened into one of pain and horror. But he has been found. He is alive. Greatly changed, it is too probable. Almost a wreck, it is possible, though we will hope for the best. Still alive. Your father has been taken to the house of an old servant in Paris, who now keeps a wine shop in that city, and we are going there, I to identify him, if I can, you to restore him to life, love, duty, rest, and comfort. He has been found under another name, his own long forgotten or long concealed. It would be worse than useless now to inquire which. It would be dangerous. But what is the matter? She doesn't notice a word. Miss Manette! Miss Manette! perfectly still and silent, and not even fallen back in her chair. She sat insensible, with her eyes open and fixed upon him, and with that last expression looking as if it were carved into her forehead. Monsieur Defarge, the wine shopkeeper, was a martial-looking dark man, with good eyes and a good bold breadth between them. He rolled his eyes about his shop until they rested upon an elderly gentleman and a young lady, who were seated in a corner. Other company were there, playing cards, playing dominoes, standing by the counter, lengthening out a short supply of wine. He took notice that the elderly gentleman said in a look to the young lady, "This is our man." "What the devil do you do in that galley there?" said Monsieur Defarge to himself. "I don't know you." The elderly gentleman advanced and begged the favour of a word. "Willingly, sir." Monsieur Defarge stepped with him to the door. Their conference was very short and very decided. Almost at the first word, Monsieur Defarge started and became deeply attentive. It had not lasted a minute when he nodded and went out. The gentleman then beckoned to the young lady, and they too went out. Mr. Jarvis Lorry and Miss Manette, emerging from the wine shop thus, joined Monsieur Defarge in a doorway opening from a nauseous little black courtyard, which was the general public entrance to a great pile of house, inhabited by a great number of people. In the gloomy tile-paved entry to the gloomy tile-paved staircase, Monsieur Defarge bent down on one knee to the child of his old master and put her hand to his lips. "It is very high. It is a little difficult. Better to begin slowly." Thus Monsieur Defarge, in a stern voice, as they began ascending the stairs. "Is he alone?" "Alone? God help him, who should be with him?" "Is he always alone, then?" "Yes." "Of his own desire?" "Of his own necessity, as he was when I first saw him, after they found me and demanded to know if I would take charge of him, and at my peril be discreet. As he was then, so he is now." "Has he greatly changed?" "Changed?" No direct answer could have been half so forcible. Mr. Lorry's spirits grew heavier and heavier as he and his two companions ascended higher and higher. At last, high up, they stopped for the third time. There was yet an upper staircase to be ascended before the garret story was reached. The keeper of the wine shop, always going a little in advance, and always going on the side which Mr. Lorry took, as though he dreaded to be asked any question by the young lady, turned himself about here, and carefully feeling in the pockets of the coat he carried over his shoulder, took out a key. "The door is locked, then, my friend?" "Yes." "You think it necessary to keep the unfortunate gentleman so retired?" "I think it necessary to turn the key." "Why?" "Why? Because he has lived so long locked up that he would be frightened, rave, tear himself to pieces, die, come to I know not what harm, if his door was left open." "Is it possible?" "It is possible, yes, and a beautiful world we live in when it is possible, and when many other such things are possible, and not only possible, but done, see you, under that sky there, every day. Long live the devil! Let us go in." They went on slowly and softly until they reached the top. There he put the key into the lock and turned it as heavily as he could. The door slowly opened inward under his hand, and he looked into the room and said something. A faint voice answered something. Little more than a single syllable could have been spoken on either side. He then looked back over his shoulder and beckoned them to enter. The garret, built to be a dry repository for firewood and the like, was dim and dark, for the window was in truth a door in the roof, with a little crane over it for the hoisting up of stores from the street, unglazed and closing up the middle in two pieces, like any other door of French construction. To exclude the cold, one half of this door was fast closed, and the other was opened but a very little way. Such a scanty portion of light was admitted through these means that it was difficult on first coming in to see anything, and long habit alone could have formed in anyone the ability to do work requiring nicety in such obscurity. Yet work of that kind was being done in the garret, for with his back towards the door and his face towards the window, where the keeper of the wine shop stood looking at him, a white-haired man sat on a low bench, stooping forward and very busy, making shoes. Good day, said Monsieur Defarge, looking down at the white head that bent low over the shoemaking. The white head was raised for a moment, and a very faint voice responded to the salutation. Good day. You are still hard at work, I see. Yes, I am working. The faintness of the voice was pitiable and dreadful. It was not the faintness of physical weakness, though confinement and hard fare no doubt had their part in it. Its deplorable peculiarity was that it was the faintness of solitude and disuse. It was like the last feeble echo of a sound made long and long ago. So entirely had it lost the life and resonance of the human voice that it affected the senses like a once beautiful colour, faded away into a poor weak stain. So sunken and suppressed it was, that it was like a voice underground. So expressive it was of a hopeless and lost creature, that a famished traveller, wearied out by wandering in a wilderness, might have remembered home and friends in such a tone before lying down to die. I want to let in a little more light here. You can bear a little more? What did you say? You can bear a little more light? I must bear it if you let it in. As the half door was opened a little further and secured at that angle, a broad ray of light fell into the garret and showed the workman with an unfinished shoe upon his lap. His few common tools and various scraps of leather were at his feet and on his bench. He had a white beard raggedly cut, a hollow face, and exceedingly bright eyes. His yellow rags of shirt lay open at the throat, and showed his body to be withered and worn. He and his old canvas frock and his loose stockings and all his poor tatters of clothes had, in a long seclusion from light and air, faded down to such a dull uniformity of parchment yellow that it would have been hard to say which was which. Are you going to finish that pair of shoes today? Asked Defarge, motioning to Mr. Lorry to come forward. What did you say? Do you mean to finish that pair of shoes today? I can't say that I mean to. I suppose so. I don't know. The question reminded him of his work, and he bent over it again. Mr. Lorry came silently forward, leaving the daughter by the door. When he had stood for a minute or two by the side of Defarge, the shoemaker looked up. He showed no surprise at seeing another figure, but the unsteady fingers of one of his hands strayed to his lips as he looked at it. His lips and his nails were of the same pale lead colour, and when the hand dropped to his work, and he once more bent over the shoe. You have a visitor, you see, Come, here is monsieur, who knows a well-made shoe when he sees one. Show him that shoe you were working at. Take it, monsieur. Mr. Lorry took it in his hand. Tell monsieur what kind of shoe it is, and the maker's name. I forget what it was you asked me. What did you say? I said, couldn't you describe the kind of shoe for monsieur's information? It is a lady's shoe. It is a young lady's walking shoe. It is in the present mode. I never saw the mode. I have had a pattern in my hand. He glanced at the shoe with some passing touch of pride. And the maker's name? The task of recalling him from the vacancy into which he always sank when he had spoken was like endeavouring, in the hope of some disclosure, to stay the spirit of a fast-dying man. Did you ask me for my name? Assuredly I did. 105 North Tower. Is that all? 105 North Tower. With a weary sound, there was not a sigh nor a groan. He bent to work again until the silence was again broken. You are not a shoemaker by trade, said Mr. Lorry. I am not a shoemaker by trade? No, I was not a shoemaker by trade. I learnt it here. I taught myself. I asked leave to. I asked leave to teach myself, and I got it with much difficulty after a long while, and I have made shoes ever since. As he held out his hand for the shoe that had been taken from him, Mr. Lorry said, Monsieur Manette, do you remember nothing of me? The shoe dropped to the ground, and he sat looking fixedly at the questioner. Monsieur Manette. Mr. Lorry laid his hand upon Defarge's arm. Do you remember nothing of this man? Look at him. Look at me. Is there no old banker, no old business, no old servant, no old time rising in your mind, Monsieur Manette? Darkness had fallen on him. He looked at the two less and less attentively, and his eyes in gloomy abstraction sought the ground. Finally, with a deep, long sigh, he took the shoe up and resumed his work. Have you recognized him, monsieur? Yes, for a moment. At first I thought it quite hopeless, but I have unquestionably seen, for a single moment, a face that I once knew well. Hush! Let us draw further back. Hush! She had moved from the wall of the garret, very near to the bench on which he sat. There was something awful in his unconsciousness of the figure that could have put out its hand and touched him as he stooped over his labour. Not a word was spoken, not a sound was made. She stood like a spirit beside him, and he bent over his work. It happened at length that he had occasion to change the instrument in his hand for his shoemaker's knife, which lay on that side of him which was not the side on which she stood. He had taken it up and was stooping to work again when his eyes caught the skirt of her dress. He raised them and saw her face. The two spectators started forward, but she stayed them with a motion of her hand. She had no fear of his striking at her with the knife, though they had. What is this? With the tears streaming down her face, she put her hands to her lips and kissed them to him, then clasped them on her breast, as if she laid his ruined head there. You are not the jailer's daughter? No. Who are you? Not yet trusting the tones of her voice, she sat down on the bench beside him and laid her head upon his arm. He laid the knife down slowly as he sat staring at her. Her golden hair, which she wore in long curls, had been hurriedly pushed aside and fell down over her neck. Advancing his hand by little and little, he took it up and looked at it. He laid down his work and put his hand to his neck and took off a blackened string with a scrap of folded rag attached. He opened this carefully on his knee, and it contained a very little quantity of hair, not more than 1 or 2 long golden hairs, which he had in some old day wound off upon his finger. She had laid her head upon my shoulder that night when I was summoned out. She had a fear of my going, though I had none. And when I was brought to the North Tower, I found these upon my sleeve. You will leave me them, I said. They can never help me to escape in the body, though they may in the spirit. Those were the words I used. I remember them very well. How is this? Was it you? She sat perfectly still, and only said, I entreat you, good gentlemen, do not come near us. Do not speak. Do not move. No, no, no. You are too young, too blooming. It can't be. See what the prisoner is. These are not the hands she knew. This is not the face she knew. This is not a voice she ever heard. No, no. She was, and he was, before the slow years of the North Tower, ages ago. What is your name, my gentle angel? She fell upon her knees before him, and her appealing hands laid upon his breast. Oh, sir, at another time you shall know my name, and who my mother was, and who my father, and how I never knew their hard, hard history. But I cannot tell you at this time, and I cannot tell you here. All that I may tell you here and now is that I pray you to touch me and to bless me. Kiss me, oh my dear, my dear. His cold white head mingled with her radiant hair, which warmed and lighted it as though it were the light of freedom shining on him. If you hear in my voice, I don't know that it is so, but I hope it is. If you hear in my voice any resemblance to a voice that once was sweet music in your ears, weep for it, weep for it. If you touch, in touching my hair, anything that recalls a beloved head that lay on your breast when you were young and free, weep for it, weep for it. If, when I enter the home there is before us, where I will be true to you with all my duty and with all my faithful service, I bring back the remembrance of a home long desolate, while the poor heart pined away, weep for it, weep for it. She held him close around the neck and rocked him on her breast like a child. If, when I tell you, dearest dear, that your agony is over, and I have come here to take you from it, and that we go to England to be at peace and at rest, I cause you to think of your useful life laid waste, and of our native France so wicked to you, weep for it, weep for it. And if, when I shall tell you of my name, and of my father who is living, and of my mother who is dead, you learn that I have to kneel to my honoured father, and implore his pardon for having never, for his sake, striven all day, and lain awake and wept all night, because the love of my poor mother hid his torture from me. Weep for it, weep for it. Weep for her then, and for me. Good gentlemen, thank God, I feel his sacred tears, and his sobs strike against my heart. Oh, see, thank God for us, thank God. He had sunk in her arms, with his face drooped on her breast. A sight so touching, yet so terrible in the tremendous wrong and suffering that had gone before it, that the two beholders covered their faces. When the quiet of the garret had been long undisturbed, and his heaving breast and shaken form had yielded to the calm that must follow all storms, emblem to humanity of the rest and silence into which the storm called life must hush at last, they came forward to raise the father and daughter from the ground. He had gradually drooped to the floor and lay there in a lethargy, worn out. She had nestled down with him, that his head might lie upon her arm, and her hair, drooping over him, curtained him from the light. The second reading from A Tale of Two Cities is entitled The Fancy Ball. It was the year of our Lord 1781. On the throne of England, a king with a large jaw and a queen with a plain face. On the throne of France, a king with a large jaw and a queen with a fair face. In both countries, it was clearer than crystal that things were settled forever. Monseigneur, one of the great lords at the court of Versailles, held a reception. Monseigneur was in his inner room, his holy of holies to the worshippers in the suite of rooms without. Monseigneur was about to take his chocolate. Monseigneur could swallow a great many things with ease, and was supposed by some sullen minds to be rather rapidly swallowing France. But his happy chocolate could not so much as get into the throat of Monseigneur without the aid of 4 strong men, besides the cook. One lackey carried the chocolate pot into the sacred presence. A second milled and frothed the chocolate. A third presented the napkin, and a fourth poured the chocolate out. Last night, Monseigneur had been out at a little supper, where the comedy and the opera were charmingly represented. The comedy and the opera had far more influence with Monseigneur than the needs of France. Of his pleasures, Monseigneur had the truly noble idea that the world was made for them. "The earth and the fullness thereof are mine," saith Monseigneur. Yet the reception held by Monseigneur, though a beautiful scene and adorned with every device of decoration, his reception was, in truth, not a sound business. Military officers destitute of military knowledge, naval officers with no idea of a ship, ecclesiastics with sensual eyes, loose tongues, and looser lives, doctors who made fortunes out of dainty remedies for imaginary disorders, philosophers who were remodelling the world with words and making towers of Babel to scale the skies with. All these exemplary gentlemen of the finest breeding were in the most exemplary state of exhaustion at the reception of Monseigneur, where every human creature was disfigured by the leprosy of unreality. But the comfort was that all the company were perfectly dressed. If the day of judgment could only be ascertained to be a dress day, everybody from Monseigneur's reception would be eternally correct. Such frizzing and powdering and sticking up of hair, such delicate complexions artificially mended. Everybody was dressed for a fancy ball that was never to leave off. From the palace of the Tuileries, through Monseigneur and the whole court, the fancy ball descended to the common executioner, who was required to officiate at the gallows. in a gold-laced coat, pumps, and white silk stockings. And who could possibly doubt that a system rooted in a frizzed hangman, powdered, gold-laced, pumped, and white silk stockinged, would see the very stars out? Monseigneur issued forth. What cringing and fawning! As to bowing down in body and spirit, nothing in that way was left for heaven. Bestowing a word of promise on one happy slave, and a wave of the hand on another, Monseigneur turned, got himself shut up again in his sanctuary, and was seen no more. The show being over, of all the crowd there was soon but one person left, and he, with his hat under his arm and his snuff-box in his hand, passed among the mirrors on his way out. "I devote you," said this person, turning to the sanctuary, "I devote you to the devil." With that, he walked quietly downstairs. His face was of a transparent paleness. The nose, beautifully formed otherwise, was very slightly pinched at the top of each nostril, giving the whole countenance a look of cruelty. But it was a handsome face, and a remarkable one. Its owner, Monsieur le Marquis, stepped into his carriage and was driven away. It appeared under the circumstances rather agreeable to him to see the common people dispersed before his horses. His man drove as if he were charging an enemy. With a wild rattle and clatter, the carriage dashed through streets and swept round corners, with women screaming before it and men clutching children out of the way. Then, swooping round a street corner by a fountain, one of its wheels came to a little jolt. There was a loud cry, and the horses reared and plunged. But for the latter inconvenience, the carriage would not have stopped. Monsieur le Marquis looked calmly out. What has gone wrong? A narrow street, full of offence and stench, peopled by rags and nightcaps, and smelling of rags and nightcaps. Hunger everywhere. Hunger staring down from the smokeless chimneys. Hunger staring up from the filthy roadway that had no offal among its refuse of anything to eat. Hunger rattling its dry bones. What has gone wrong? A scarecrow in a nightcap had caught up a bundle from among the feet of the horses, laid it by the fountain, and was down in the mud, howling over it like a wild animal. Monsieur le Marquis spoke again. What has happened? Said a ragged and submissive man. Pardon, Monsieur le Marquis, it is a child. Why does that man make that abominable noise? Is it his child? Excuse me, Monsieur le Marquis, it is a pity. Yes. The father, who had got up from the ground, suddenly came running at the carriage. Monsieur le Marquis clapped his hand to his sword. The man stopped, stared at him, and then shrieked two words. Killed! Dead! The people closed round and looked at Monsieur le Marquis. There was nothing revealed by the many eyes but watchfulness. Monsieur le Marquis ran his eyes over them all as if they had been rats come out of their holes. It is extraordinary to me that you people cannot take care of yourselves and your children. One or the other of you is forever in the way. How do I know what injury you have done my horses? Give him that. A gold coin fell. All the heads craned forward. The father called out again, Dead! 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 He was arrested by the arrival of another man, taller, stronger, for whom the others made way, and on whose shoulder the miserable creature fell, sobbing and crying and pointing to the fountain, where some women were stooped over the motionless bundle. The newcomer held the father's head against his breast. Be a brave man, my Gaspard. It is better for the little thing to die so than to live. It has died in a moment, without pain. Could it have lived an hour as happily? Monsieur le Marquis called out to him, You are a philosopher, you there. How do they call you? They call me Defarge. Pick up the money, philosopher, and spend it as you will. He called up to his man. The horses there, are they all right? Monsieur le Marquis leaned back and was just being driven off, with the air of a gentleman who has broken something and paid for it, when his ease was suddenly disturbed by something flying into his carriage and ringing on the floor. A coin. Hold! Oh, the horses! Who threw that? He looked at the spot where the tall Defarge had stood. What stood there now was the figure of a dark, stout woman knitting. Monsieur le Marquis looked from her to the others. You dogs! So cowed was their condition that not a hand, not a head was raised. Among the men, not one, but the woman who stood knitting lifted her eyes steadily and looked the Marquis in the face. It was not for his dignity to notice it. This has made me very late. Drive on! He was driven on, and the other carriages after him in quick succession. The general, the admiral, the doctor, the lawyer, the ecclesiastic, the comedy, the opera, the whole fancy ball came whirling by. The rats had crept out of their holes to look on. The women who had tended the bundle by the fountain sat watching the running of the water and the rolling of the fancy ball, while the one woman who had stood knitting knitted on with the steadfastness of fate. On that very day there were growing trees already marked to come down to France and be sawn into boards to make a certain movable framework. The waters of the fountain ran, the swift river ran, the day ran into evening, time and tide waited for no man. The rats were sleeping close together in their dark holes again. The fancy ball was lighted for supper. All things ran their course. A beautiful landscape, but patches of poor rye where corn should have been. Monsieur le Marquis toiled up a steep hill. A blush on his countenance was no impeachment of his high breeding. It was occasioned by a circumstance beyond his control, the setting sun. When the carriage gained the hilltop, Monsieur le Marquis looked at his hand. He was steeped in crimson. It will die out, he murmured with a smile, directly. The village at the bottom of the hill had its own poor street, with its poor brewery, poor tannery, poor tavern, all the usual poor appointments. Monsieur le Marquis cast his eyes over the faces that drooped before him. They were joined by a grizzled mender of the roads, cap in hand, at whom Monsieur le Marquis pointed a finger. Bring me that fellow there. I passed you in the road, coming up the hill. Monsieur le Marquis, I had the honour of being passed on the road. What did you look at so fixedly? I looked at the man. The peasant pointed under the carriage. All the others stooped to look. The road mender continued fearfully. Pardon, Monsieur le Marquis. He swung by the chain of the drag. Monsieur le Marquis shrugged his shoulders. May the devil carry away these idiots. Who was that man? Your clemency, Monsieur le Marquis. Of all the days of my life, I never saw him before. Swinging by the chain, to be suffocated? his head hanging over Monsieur le Marquis, like this, covered with dust, whiter than the miller, white as a spectre, tall as a spectre. All eyes looked at Monsieur le Marquis. The thin, straight lips and the markings in the nose curved with a sarcasm that looked diabolic. You did well to see a thief accompanying my carriage and not to open your mouth? Bah! Put him aside. Go on! The sweet scents of the summer night, the shadow of many overhanging trees, the light of a flambeau as the carriage stopped and the great chateau of Monsieur le Marquis was opened to him. A stone courtyard, 2 stone sweeps of staircase, stone balustrades, stone urns, stone flowers, stone faces of lions and of men, as if the Gorgon's head that turns all to stone that set eyes on it had surveyed the chateau when he was finished 2 centuries ago. Monsieur le Marquis walked up the steps. Away among the trees, the sound of an owl. All else so quiet that the flambeau carried up the steps, and the other flambeau held at the great door, burned as if they were in a closed room of state, instead of in the open night air. For it was one of those dark nights that hold their breath by the hour together, and then heave a long, low sigh, and hold their breath again. Avoiding the larger rooms, which were dark and made fast for the night, Monsieur le Marquis, with his flambeau-bearer before him, proceeded to his own private apartment, high and vaulted, windows wide open, jealousy blinds closed, so that the dark night only showed in horizontal lines of black. Monsieur le Marquis sat down alone to his sumptuous supper. His chair was opposite the window. He had taken his soup and was raising his glass of Bordeaux to his lips, when he moved his head abruptly. What was that? Outside the window! Open the blinds! Well? The servant turned from the window. Monsieur le Marquis, it is nothing. The trees and the night are all that are there. The servant looked at his master, but it would have been of as much avail to interrogate any stone face outside the chateau. Good, close them again. I am cool now, and will go to bed. The valet come and gone, Monsieur le Marquis walked to and fro in his loose chamber robe to prepare himself for sleep. That hot, still night, he moved like a refined tiger. Then, leaving one light burning on the immense hearth, he let the gauze curtains fall around him and composed himself to sleep. He heard the night break its silence with a long sigh. For 3 heavy hours, the stone faces of the chateau, lion and human, stared blindly at the black night. For 3 heavy hours, the horses in the stables rattled at their racks, the dogs barked, and the owl hooted. Dead darkness lay on all the landscape. Dead darkness added its own dead to the hushing dust on the roads. At the chateau, the water of the fountain dropped unseen and unheard, melting away like the minutes that were falling from the spring of time, through 3 dark hours. Then the water began to be grey and ghostly in the light, and the eyes of the stone faces were opened. Lighter and lighter, until at last the sun touched the tops of the still trees and poured its radiance over the hill. In the glow, the water of the fountain seemed to turn to blood. The carol of the birds was loud and high, and on the sill of the bedroom window of Monsieur le Marquis, one little bird sang its sweetest song. Gradually and surely the chateau awoke. Doors and windows were thrown open. Horses in the stables looked round over their shoulders. Dogs pulled at their chains. Trivial incidents belonging to the routine of life. But surely not so the ringing of the great bell of the chateau, nor the running up and down the stairs, nor the hurried figures on the terrace, nor all the people of the village standing about, whispering low. What did all this portend? It portended that up on the hill, in the light, in the night, the Gorgon, that turns faces to stone, had surveyed the chateau again and added one more stone face, the face for which the chateau had waited through 200 years. The stone face lay back on the pillow of Monsieur le Marquis. It was like a fine mask, suddenly startled, made angry and petrified. Driven home into the heart of the stone figure was a knife, round its hilt a frill of paper on which was scrawled, "Drive him fast to his tomb." The third and final reading from A Tale of Two Cities is entitled Echoing Footsteps. Sidney Carton, barrister, was the idlest and most unpromising of young men. Old Sidney Carton of Shrewsbury School, old seesaw Sidney, up one minute and down the next. What he drank between Hilary Term and Michaelmas would float a ship. But it was he, at the Old Bailey, London, who came to the aid of a young Charles Darnay, of the other of the two cities, Paris. Darnay being on trial for his life, the charge spying for the French. Darnay's counsel was cross-examining a witness called to identify Darnay as having been at some dockyard. The witness stubbornly insisted that it was the prisoner he had seen. Carton, hands in pockets, his attention seemingly on the ceiling, wrote on a bit of paper and tossed it to Darnay's counsel, who, on reading it, looked at the prisoner and then back at his witness. "You are quite sure it was the prisoner you saw? Did you ever see anybody very like the prisoner? Look well upon my learned friend there. Yes, the one looking at the ceiling. How say you?" Allowing for my learned friend looking slovenly, if not debauched, he and the prisoner were sufficiently alike to surprise everybody present. The upshot being to smash the witness like a crockery vessel, and Darnay was acquitted. When Darnay's friends had congratulated him and departed, Carton, unrobed and none the better in appearance, and smelling of port wine, insisted on taking him to the nearest tavern. "This is a strange chance, Darnay, that throws you and me together. Why don't you give a toast? It's on the tip of your tongue. I swear it is. What name? I'll help you. The young lady who fainted in court, Miss Lucy Manette? Ha! I was right. Her health, then." Carton flung his glass over his shoulder, where it shivered to pieces. Bring me another." How does it feel to be the object of such sympathy as hers? "Monsieur Darnay, do you think I particularly like you?" The Frenchman was at a loss how to answer. "You acted in the court as if you did like me, but I do not think that you do." "Very true. Why should you particularly like a man who resembles you?" "But there is nothing, I hope, to prevent our parting without ill blood on either side." "You n'as rien de tout, mon cher ami." "Thank you. I learnt that in the student quarter of Paris. Better days, better days. A last word, Monsieur Darnay. You think I am drunk? You shall know why. I am a disappointed man, sir. No man on earth cares for me, and I care for no man on earth. Don't let your sober face elate you, however. You don't know what it may come to. Good night. Lucy Manette and her father had lodgings in London, off Soho Square. There were few buildings then near the Oxford Road, and wild flowers grew in the now vanished fields. In Soho, country airs circulated with freedom, instead of languishing into the parish like stray paupers. In the courtyard behind the house, a plane tree rustled its green leaves. This courtyard was a harbour from the raging streets and a wonderful corner for echoes. One evening, Lucy and her father sat at their window, with Monsieur Darnay and Mr. Carton, who, as was his habit, had lounged in. The twilight air was overpoweringly sultry. Rain fell in large drops. A thundergust caught the curtains up to the ceiling like spectral wings. Said Charles Darnay, "The storm comes slowly." Said Sidney Carton, "It comes surely." They spoke low, as people watching and waiting do. Then there was a great hurry in the street of people speeding to shelter. Said Lucy, "I have sometimes made those echoes out to be the echoes of all the footsteps that are coming by and by into our lives." Sidney Carton struck in, "If that is so, there is a great crowd coming one day into our lives." The hurry of the footsteps became more and more rapid. The corner echoed and re-echoed with the tread of feet. Some, as it seemed, under the windows, some in the room, but all in the distant streets, and not one within sight. "Miss Manette, there is a great crowd bearing down upon us. I can see them by the lightning, and I hear them by the thunder. Here they come, fast and furious." A wonderful corner for echoes. Lucy sat listening to the footsteps of years. 1781, Sidney Carton declared his love for her, and was tenderly refused. 82, a marriage day shone brightly, her marriage to Charles Darnay. And the first to offer his congratulations was Sidney Carton. He was not improved in habits or in manners, but there was a certain rugged air of fidelity about him, which was new to Darnay. 1783, 84, 85, among the advancing echoes, the tread of a little daughter's feet, as she chattered in the tongues of the two cities blended in her life. 1786, 87, 88, footsteps, headlong, mad and dangerous footsteps to force their way into anybody's life. Footsteps not easily made clean again if once stained red. Footsteps far from the plane tree in Soho, in that other city of Paris. 1789. Come then, patriots and friends, we are ready! The Bastille! But the steps came nearer. From Paris a letter. To Monsieur heretofore le Marquis Saint-Evremond, now known as Darnay. From an old family servant, accused by the Revolutionary Tribunal of having helped an immigrant, and will lose my life unless that immigrant return to deliver me. Monsieur, heretofore the Marquis, I send my desolate cry across the sea. A return to Paris. The lodestone rock was drawing him, and he must sail on until he struck. Struck at the wall of Paris, where the barrier was closed when he rode up to it. Your papers, citizen? Your age, Evremond? Married, Evremond? It does not interest us that you have come voluntarily. No emigrants have rights. You are consigned, Evrémonde, to the prison of la force. A large, low room, dark and filthy, with a horrible smell of foul sleep, crowded with prisoners of both sexes. The newcomer, instinctively associating prisoners with shameful crime, recoiled, but they were all rising, from their reading, their writing, their embroidery, to receive him with all the graces and courtesies of life. So strangely clouded were their refinements by the prison gloom that he seemed to stand in the company of the dead. The ghost of beauty, the ghost of elegance, the ghost of pride, the ghost of frivolity. His wife followed him to Paris. How could she not? There was near the prison a spot which, she had been told, he could see from an upper window. There she would stand every day in all weathers for 2 hours, and never missed a single day for 1 year and 3 months. Every one of those days through the stony streets the tumbrils jolted heavily, filled with condemned. Citizen Evrémonde, called Darnay, you are summoned to the prison of the Conciergerie, to be tried tomorrow for your life. Another had followed to Paris, the idle and unpromising barrister, the old Sidney Carton of Shrewsbury School. But in Paris he had not been so idle, for he had been forming a plan, most surprisingly crafty and careful for the old seesaw Sidney. And on the eve of the fateful trial of the citizen Evrémonde called Darnay, the plan was ready for eventualities. There is nothing more to do, said Carton, glancing up at the moon, until tomorrow. I can't sleep. It was not a reckless spirit in which he said these words. It was the settled manner of a tired man who had wandered and got lost, but who had at length struck into his road and saw its end. Long ago, when he had been a youth of great promise, he had followed his father to the grave. The words spoken at that grave arose in his mind as he walked the dark streets of Paris. In a city dominated by the axe, with sorrow rising in him for the 63 who had that day been put to death, he repeated those words as he crossed the river Seine. I am the resurrection and the life, saith the Lord. He that believeth in me shall never die. The night wore out, and the day came coldly, like a dead face out of the sky. Sidney Carton drank a little coffee, and having washed and changed, went to the place of trial. Charles Evrémonde, called Darnay, aristocrat, an enemy of the Republic. At every juryman's vote, a roar. Another and another, roar upon roar, unanimously voted. Back to the Conciergerie, and death within 24 hours. In the black Conciergerie, the doomed of the day awaited their fate. To Charles Darnay, alone in a cell, it was not easy, with the face of his beloved wife before him, to compose his mind to what it must bear. He finished his last letters, and the lights were put out. When he lay on his straw bed, he had done with this world. The clocks struck the numbers he would never hear again. 10 gone forever, 11 gone forever, 12 coming on to pass away, 12 gone forever. Footsteps in the stone passage. The key turned, the door was quickly opened and closed, and there stood before him, quiet, with a smile on his face and a finger on his lip, Sidney Carton. I am possessed of a power over one of the keepers here. Take off those boots you wear, and draw on these of mine. Quick! The prisoner was like a child in his hands. Change that cravat for this of mine, and take this ribbon from your hair, and shake out your hair like this of mine. Carton, it is madness. It cannot be accomplished. What is that kerchief in your hand? It is not madness, Darnay, and it can be accomplished. What vapour is that? I implore you, Carton, not to add your danger too. Carton's hand was firm at his nostrils, and he was stretched insensible on the ground. Carton dressed himself in the clothes the prisoner had laid aside, combed back his hair, and tied it with the ribbon the prisoner had worn. Enter there. Keeper, get assistance and take me to the coach, for the parting interview has overpowered me. Such a thing has happened here before, often. You know that. Drag me outside. There. The door closed, and Carton was alone. No cry was raised. He sat at the table. The clock struck. Several doors were opened in succession, and finally his own. He followed into a large, dark room, crowded with the ghost of beauty, the ghost of elegance, the ghost of pride, the ghost of frivolity. As he stood in a dim corner, a man stopped to embrace him, as having a knowledge of him. It thrilled him with a great dread of discovery, but the man went on. Then a young woman with widely opened, patient eyes came to speak to him. Citizen Evrémonde, I was with you at the first prison, the seamstress. You remember? I forget what you were accused of. Plots. Who would think of plotting with a creature like me? But are you dying for him? I am not afraid, but if I ride with you, will you let me take your hand? Along the streets, the death carts rumble. 6 tumbrils carry the day's wine to La Guillotine. The tumbrils roll along and plough up a long, steady furrow. Ridges of faces are thrown to this side and to that. In many a window, the inmate has visitors to see the sight. He points to this cart and to this, and seems to tell who sat here yesterday and who there the day before. Of those who ride in the tumbrils, some observe these things with an impassive stare. Some are sunk in silent despair. There are some who cast upon the multitude such glances as they have seen in theatres and in paintings. One is so shattered with horror that he sings. The furrow is turning round into a square. The ridge is now closed behind the last plough, for all are following to the place of reckoning. In front of it, seated in chairs, as in a garden of public diversion, are a number of women knitting. The ministers of Sainte Guillotine are robed and ready. The engine whirs up and falls. Crash! A head is held up, and the knitting women, who scarcely lifted their eyes when the head could think and speak, count 1. Crash! And the knitting women count 2, 3, 4, 5. Sidney Carton descends from the tumbril, and the seamstress is lifted out after him. He holds her patient hand as he promised. But for you, dear stranger, I should not be so composed, for I am naturally faint of heart. Keep your eyes upon me, my child, and mind no other object. They speak as if they were alone, these 2 children of the universal mother, so wide apart and differing, who have come together on the dark highway. Will you let me ask you one last question? I am very ignorant. In the South Country, I have an only cousin whom I love dearly. She may live a long time. Do you think that while I wait for her, it will seem long to me? No, my child, there is no time there. I am so ignorant. Is the moment come? They kiss each other. She goes next before him, is gone. The knitting women count 22. I am the resurrection and the life. He that believeth in me shall never die. The murmuring of many voices, the upturning of many faces, the pressing on of many footsteps, so that the crowd swells forward like one great heave of water. 23. They said of him about the city that night that it was the peacefullest man's face ever beheld there. One of the sufferers by the same axe, a woman, had asked to be allowed to write down the thoughts that were inspiring her. If he had given utterance to his thoughts, they would have been these: it is a far, far better thing that I do than I have ever done. It is a far, far better rest that I go to than I have ever known. The end of the readings.